Admiral Kuznetsov. The admiral of the Soviet Union's fleet, Kuznetsov, is one of the most historically significant aircraft carriers in the military world, not for its combat record or longevity, but for a host of controversies that repeatedly tarnished its reputation. The history of Admiral Kuznetsov is filled with governmental negligence, media scandals, and a lot of correction. In this video, we will talk about the very interesting history of this curious aircraft carrier, its alleged theft from Ukraine, its deplorable current state, and of course what the future holds for the enigmatic flagship of the Russian Navy. The protagonist of this video was built in the Mykolaiv shipyard in the former Soviet Republic of Ukraine, and it was launched in 1985. It was a great economic expense for the Soviet Union, which at that time had a major economic crisis. Undoubtedly, it was a display of Soviet military might. Interestingly, the Kuznetsov has changed its name 3 times throughout its history. First, when it was under development, it was thought to be named Riga, like the capital of Latvia. Later in 1985, just after it was launched, its name was changed to Leonid Brezhnev, in honor of the high command of the Communist Party who served the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics the longest. Surpassed only by Joseph Stalin, who had died a few years prior, he was a highly significant figure. That's why they wanted to name the aircraft carrier after him. Later, during its first sea trials, in 1989, its name was changed again to Tbilisi, and not content with changing its name twice, they changed it one last time. Just before the aircraft carrier entered service, they changed it to the current name of Admiral of the Fleet of the Soviet Union Kuznetsov in honor of World War's second Admiral Nikolai Kuznetsov. As you may know, the Soviet Union would collapse in December of 1991, and as you may also know, the Admiral Kuznetsov was in Ukraine, just when on August 10th of 1991, Ukraine would declare its independence. This was a problem as the new president of Ukraine, Leonid Kravchuk, demanded the Admiral Kuznetsov as part of Ukraine, as it was made there in their own territory. However, the commander of the Admiral Kuznetsov, who was in charge at that time, Viktor Yarygin, was widely pro-Russian. When Kravchuk ordered him to dock the Admiral Kuznetsov in Ukraine, Yarygin simply ignored those orders. In December of 1991, days before the collapse of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, on the same day that Ukraine would hold a referendum to decide the fate of the country, Yarygin would be given the order to leave the Black Sea along with almost the entire Russian fleet and abandon Ukraine to head to Murmansk. That's why many consider that the Admiral Kuznetsov was stolen from Ukraine, and depending on who you ask, some will tell you no and others will tell you yes. From that moment on, the problems for Admiral Kuznetsov in the newly formed Russian Federation would begin. When Russia took Admiral Kuznetsov, it did not have a port capable of accommodating a ship of these characteristics, as the specialized ports were in Ukraine. This was a big problem for the integrity of Admiral Kuznetsov. For example, aircraft carriers are usually assisted by the port with basic services such as water and electricity when they are docked. Otherwise, the aircraft carrier would always have to be operational, causing more wear and tear than necessary. This was often the case with the Admiral Kuznetsov, as initially Russia did not have a specialized port for the aircraft carrier. The Kuznetsov often had to be constantly operating while docked to meet the crew's needs, causing great wear and tear on the generators and the aircraft carrier's general systems. Despite not having specialized infrastructure for the Admiral Kuznetsov, it was still commissioned in January 1991, becoming the flagship of the new Russian Navy. An interesting fact about the Admiral Kuznetsov is that legally it is not an aircraft carrier, although in reality it is. The Soviets designated it as a heavy aircraft-carrying cruiser because in the Strait of Turkey, the entrance to the Black Sea, the passage of aircraft carriers over 15,000 tons is prohibited. The Kuznetsov has a displacement of 40,000 tons, so if it were legally registered as an aircraft carrier, it would not be able to leave the Black Sea. The Admiral Kuznetsov, while it was commissioned in '91, it wouldn't receive aircraft until '95, and this year would mark the first deployment of the Admiral Kuznetsov. It was in the Mediterranean, with favorable weather and without much pressure. It even made world news. It was also the first time the world saw the characteristic thick black smoke that is emitted by the 8 pressurized KBG 4 boilers. Many times the smoke released by the Kuznetsov was so dense and large that it was visible from space. During the first deployment in the Mediterranean, quite a few defects were seen in it. For example, there was only water for 20 minutes a day due to problems with the water distillation system, so the more than 2,000 men who made up the crew had to suffer quite a bit when it came to taking a bath. In addition, it was very common that the propulsion systems would mysteriously fail, causing the engineers to have to constantly repair it at sea. This often resulted in the Kuznetsov having to be towed. Even in future operations like in Syria, in 2016, the Kuznetsov always had a tugboat on hand just in case. However, all of these were major issues. Easy to solve just with good maintenance and even some upgrades. From that moment on, the Admiral Kuznetsov was used very limitedly. However, despite being little time sailing, the Kuznetsov has not been exempt from controversies. For example, since it was first deployed, multiple accidents related to the arrestor cables have been presented repeatedly. One of the most famous was in Syria in 2016, where a Su-33 broke the arrestor cable and the pilot fortunately managed to eject before falling into the water. However, the Su-33 was not as lucky as the pilot. Even the problems reached the Kuznetsov without sailing. In 2017, it was taken to Murmansk again for general maintenance. In 2018, it had to spend time in a floating dry dock, the PD-50, a quite unique and historic dock, to continue with the extensive maintenance work. But unfortunately, on October the 30th of that same year, the power supply from the coast was cut off, causing the pumps of the dock's ballast tanks necessary to keep the dock afloat to stop. This caused the dock to tilt very prominently, causing 2 large 65-ton cranes to fall onto the Kuznetsov, causing it great damage. And of course, all of this caused the dock to sink completely. Subsequently, the dock director in charge of the Kuznetsov's repair, Yevgeny Zudin, was arrested on high corruption charges. According to investigations, he was directly involved with the sinking of the PT-50. It turns out that in case of emergencies, the pumps are powered by diesel generators, but when the electricity was cut off, the generators did not turn on, as they had no fuel. Director Yevgeny Zudin stole the money intended for the emergency pump fuel. In addition, he stole more than $500,000 from the funds that were supposed to be for the repair of the Admiral Kuznetsov. A very regrettable fact. Even the Admiral Kuznetsov caught fire recently in December of 2022. It was a big fire that fortunately did not cause any injuries or major damage. However, this fire was also quite regrettable. After the sinking of the PD-50, the Russian government created a huge dock for Admiral Kuznetsov so he could finish his midlife maintenance, which will give him at least 20 more years of useful life. Sailors have many superstitions. For example, it is said to be bad luck to carry bananas on your ship, but something that is very, very bad luck is to change the name of your ship, because the Kuznetsov had its name changed 3 times. Perhaps this is why the Kuznetsov has had such a stormy career. The truth is very understandable. The situation of the Kuznetsov over all these years, as maintaining an aircraft carrier of these characteristics, is extremely costly, and considering that Russia even had to build the infrastructure to maintain this aircraft carrier from scratch, made owning the Kuznetsov quite complex. And also considering that Russia was not in the best economic situation when it became independent from the Soviet Union, it makes us think that the truth about Admiral Kuznetsov just had very bad luck to have been created right at the collapse of the Soviet Union. Nowadays, it seems that the repairs are going smoothly. It seems that after all these controversies, the government has started to invest a lot in Admiral Kuznetsov, and we hope that Admiral Kuznetsov will sail the seas again. Very soon, it is expected to be put back into service this year, and we all hope that it will not be turned into a theme park like what happened to the aircraft carrier Minsk. It would be a very interesting video to talk about the Minsk Thanks for watching. See you next time.